How you guys doing? Do I have to stand? I guess I have to stand still, huh? Hang on, let me turn this thing on. Welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and it's thrilling to be here. This is my first time in Little Rock, but not my first time in Arkansas. I've told the story a couple of times today, but I'll share it with you. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the first time I drove across the country to go to ASU, I picked specific places that I wanted to visit on my way to Phoenix, and one of the places that I wanted to visit was Hope, Arkansas, because I wanted to see where our president was from. And so the first night on our road trip, we stopped in Hope, Arkansas, and I got to see everywhere that Bill Clinton did everything, in every single store that was there. So I think I still have my Bill Clinton slept here a sticker that I picked up during that trip. But anyway, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I wanted to throw up some contact information for those of you who use social media, whether it's Google+, Twitter. I also write a blog, which is more like a journal on education and the thoughts around education and technology and education. But Twitter's a great way to kind of keep conversations going. Actually, Chad and I talk frequently through Twitter. Hashtags keep conversations going. If you're really interested in education, there's some amazing people that you can follow in education. There's some great hashtags like EdChat or EdTech, and these are hashtags that have big conversations about what's going on in education, so I wanted to share that with you. But I want to start with this idea of the change that we need in education and what we need to focus on in education. And I want to give you my perspective, because my perspective tends to be a little different than other people's perspective because of my background. So I am a first-generation American, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York. My mother came from Argentina, and when I showed up at PS 111 for kindergarten, they said, "Welcome to PS 111," and I said, "¿Qué?" So English is technically my second language. But I grew up in a very interesting environment, and I saw two ways out of this environment. For those of you who have visited, the Hell's Kitchen area of New York, it's not the one that you visit today, because it's actually a nice place now. My mother actually still lives in the same apartment I grew up in. But the Hell's Kitchen I grew up in was a little different in the 70s and 80s. And I saw two ways out of that environment. One, playing in the NBA or some other sport, or through education. And I didn't think that I was going to be very good in basketball or as good as playing in the NBA, so I decided that education was going to be my way out. And this idea of disrespecting the impossible is important, because when you're growing up in those types of environments, you have to have a disrespect for impossible, because our graduation rates in that neighborhood at that time were, maybe 40%. So your odds of graduating high school weren't very high. Or even your odds of going to college were were less than that, and going to graduate school was one of those impossibilities, and I did all those things, and so I've had a disrespect for the impossible to begin with, and I've always had that disrespect for the impossible. So when we think about changing education and what we need to do in education, it's important to think about what we need to look at it from a perspective of it's not impossible to change education. As a matter of fact, if you look on LinkedIn, I think I'm the only graduate from SUNY Brockport that works at Google. So impossible is not a word that's in my vocabulary, and that's kind of what drives me, and it's important to think about that, because education is that silver bullet. Education is that key. It literally can disrupt poverty for not only a generation, not only for a student, but for generations to come. Because now I have two kids, and I have my 12-year-old and my 21-year-old. By the way, for those of you who have small children, there's nothing more bizarre than sitting at dinner and having your 21-year-old ask the waiter what kind of tequila they have. It's very, very strange. But my 21-year-old never asked me if she had to go to college. I never told her she had to go to college. She just assumed she was going to college because I went to college. And she assumed she was going to college because everyone around her went to college. She assumes she's going to graduate school because I went to graduate school, and her mother went to graduate school, and she assumes I'm paying for it. But that's a good problem to have, right? I mean, I still have a year to break the bad news to her. The their expectation, and my 12-year-old has been taking online classes for the last 2 years. The expectations that my kids have about what life is possible and what they expect from life is completely different than mine, and that's a good thing. And that's the power and the potential of having a great education, or just being educated, is that it affects generations to come. Not only that, even if everything was great in education and graduation rates were great and we didn't have the numbers that we have with the achievement gap, even if everything was great, we are living in a new economy. And when I was in school in the 70s, in 1973, about 28% of the jobs required some kind of post-secondary education. And by the time we get to 2020, more than 60% of the jobs are going to require some kind of post-secondary education. And it doesn't matter if you're in the middle skill group or in the high skill group, skills continuously develop, and we need to build continuous skills in this new world that we live in because we have a new economy. And you have to think about what we're doing with our students, right? And the task that we have that we're having our teachers focus on, which is we're asking our teachers to prepare students for jobs that don't exist, to work with discoveries and inventions and technologies that haven't been invented yet, to solve problems that haven't been fully defined yet, right? That's what we're asking our teachers to do. Because I'm standing here in front of you with a job, I pay my mortgage with a job that did not exist when I graduated high school. And these jobs continuously evolve and change, and so that's what we're asking our students to do, is we're asking them to prepare for jobs that don't exist. And that's the main crux of what we're trying to focus on here, because that's important to point out. Now, for most of history, where you were born, the family you were born into, even your proximity to libraries determined your academic success, right? This is the Columbus Library on 51st Street and 10th Avenue. This was my information mecca center. This is where I had to go get information. And the library closed at 5 o'clock, and basketball practice went to 4:45, or it wasn't open on the weekends, or Vinny or Louie would steal the books and I couldn't get to them. But this is the library that all the schools in my neighborhood had to use. This was the library that all the citizens in my community had to use. This was our information center. And today, all the world's information is at our fingertips. We have 1 million Columbus libraries at our fingertips, and no one is freaking out about that, right? No one's like blown away by that idea that we have 1 million Columbus libraries in our pocket. And I look at I think about my experience in 7th grade, and then I look at my 12-year-old's experience in 7th grade, and it's basically the same. Even the policies are the same, even though the technology's changed, where when I was in 7th grade, I wasn't allowed to wear my Casio calculator watch. Anyone still have one of those? No? Okay, I need to find one of those. And my 12-year-old's not allowed to bring his iPhone in the class, right? Same policy, different technology, and yet the world has fundamentally shifted and changed right beneath us. Now, for those of you who have been around a long time like me, we know that we've been talking about the use of technology in education for a very long time. Whether it was motion pictures or television or programming or computers, we've been talking about computers in education since at least the 1960s. So it's been a long time that we've been talking about technology in education. But I think that there are 3 things that are going on that make the time right now. And I want to kind of focus on those 3 things. The first is this idea that we understand that learning is personal, right? That we understand that there are components to relevance and engagement that are part of education that we can now take advantage of. Differentiation in education has been a topic that's been around for a very long time, and now with use of technology, we can actually focus on that. We know that students, learn subjects in different ways. We know that one student might be interested in one subject, and yet another student might be interested in another subject, and that's how they get engaged. And there's different ways to do engagement for students. There's all these things that we know in the learning science space, and now finally technology lets us take advantage of that. And again, we have to ask ourselves, with this information in mind, with this technology at our hands, why does my 12-year-old 7th grade classroom look the same as my classroom did? But more importantly, that teacher is giving these students the same information in the same way, at the same time, at the same pace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we can change that. Technology can help us with that differentiation that is important in learning. Second is that we understand, or we now need to recognize that technology is wrapped around the core of our lives, right? Let me ask you guys a question. How many of you have not used technology today? Right. How many of you has not used the web today? Right. Right. So how long did that take us? 5 years? 7 years? I mean, the iPhone's only 7 years old, right? How long did it take us to have technology wrap itself around the core of our lives? It hasn't been that long. I mean, do you remember we used to have to call the internet with our home phones, and the internet was busy, or it would hang up on you? And our reward for that was what? A bunch of pages that had words, that had links that had words, that had links that had words, and every once in a while somebody would put a picture up, and you'd get so excited that there was a picture, and you would wait another 20 minutes for that picture to pop up. And what's our expectation now? Our expectation is that we need to be connected everywhere that we go. My personal struggle with this is I lose my mind on an airplane when I don't have good, fast connectivity while I'm traveling at 35,000 feet at 535 miles an hour. That's the expectation that I have now, right? And I've seen teachers lose their minds at conferences if the technology wasn't good or the broadband wasn't good at that conference. This did not take very long for us, for this to happen. And so we live in a world now where there's been a shift. There's been a shift from where we used to go to work to use technology in the web. Now we use our personal lives as part of that, right? So try to explain to a 10-year-old what Cyber Monday means. I remember this past Thanksgiving, my 11-year-old at the time saying, why do they call it Cyber Monday? Why can't you shop any day you want, right? This idea that it's called Cyber Monday came from the fact that we had to go to work to do our shopping, right? Because that's where the technology was. That's where the internet connectivity was. And now it's in our personal lives. It's wrapped around the core of our lives. So imagine what this generation of students are going through. So the third thing that's happening now is this what I call this tech web generation. This generation of students that are in our school systems today. This generation of students who don't know that the world existed before Google, that don't know that the world existed before Wi-Fi, that don't know that the world existed before laptops or mobile devices. This is the generation of students that's in our schools today. This is a picture of my 12-year-old who over just this past Christmas comes up to me to show me that he's learning how to code in JavaScript. And I never told him he should learn how to code in JavaScript. As a matter of fact, if anything, I want him learning how to code in Python. But he's learning how to code in JavaScript, and I asked him why he's learning how to code in JavaScript. And he's learning how to code in JavaScript because he's playing this game called Minecraft that if you don't know about, you should learn about. And he's learning how to code in JavaScript for Minecraft because he wants to be able to create mods that he can use in Minecraft because he can't find any of the ones that he wants. He wants the mods to do what he wants them to do, so he's going to code it himself. And so he went to Khan Academy and through Code Academy, and he's learning how to code in JavaScript. And then a couple weeks later, he shows me his code. He wants me to QA it for him, and I pretend like I know what the code says. And I'm like, yep, looks good. Go ahead, use that code. And so he's coding now, and I don't know how to code, and that's my 12-year-old, right? So it makes me think about what is the potential of our students? Because even under the best circumstances, with the best curriculum, are we letting kids reach their full potential? Are we giving them more open space that they can use to learn things that they're interested in? Because even in the gaming world, what you're seeing is this shift where in the gaming world, you have games that are very linear, right? There's learning objectives, if you will, and you have to pass missions and you have to do all these things, but it's very prescribed. Even in the gaming world, there's a map to the whole world. What kids today are saying is like, we don't want the map. We want to create the map. We want to start from scratch. And that's what you're seeing in the popularity of games like Minecraft, where kids are developing what the worlds look like. So it makes me wonder, are kids really reaching their full potential, or are we limiting them in what we do in education? And I ran across a couple of things while I was doing my research that was interesting, like what kids think, what kids say when you give them the opportunity to open up, right? And I think there's nothing wrong with the plan of getting a girlfriend, kissing her, and then ruling the world. I think that's a good plan, right? Or the fact that, maybe love is the strongest force in the world. Or making sure that we're asking the right questions. And so I'm obviously exaggerating here, but the point is that if we're asking our kids limiting questions, maybe we're getting limited answers from them, right? And we have to ask ourselves, are we letting kids reach their full potential in this environment that we have? Because we have a generation of kids with different expectations. They expect to be online. They expect to be online all the time. They expect to be connected. They expect to be able to use technology. They expect to be able to use any tool that they want in any given format. Whether it's a tablet, whether it's a laptop, whether it's Google TV, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whatever they're using, they're expecting to be able to get to their stuff in any way that they possibly can. Now, when it comes to this generation of students, I try to take any chance I can to talk to students, especially those that are growing up in an environment like I grew up in. One, it's my responsibility to go stand in front of them and say, listen, if I can do this, you can do this too. But the second reason that I talk to them is because I don't believe that we should be asking kids what they want to be when they grow up. One, because the job, as we just mentioned, doesn't exist, so they don't know what they're going to be when they grow up. And two, most kids, especially kids who are growing up in environments like I grew up in, don't know what a biomedical engineer is, right? Or don't know what some of these jobs are, even if we wanted to talk about jobs. So my perspective of what I ask them is, I ask them what problem do they want to solve? And then I ask them to think about how to solve that problem. And then I ask them to think about what knowledge, skills, and abilities they're going to need to solve that problem. Because part of that is also pushing the responsibility back to them and saying, look, you have the world at your fingertips. You have all the access to the world's information. What education, big word education, do you need to solve that problem? Whether that is online classes that you can take, whether it's working with your teacher, whether it's YouTube videos that you can watch, or people you can follow on YouTube, on Twitter, people you can connect with, so forth and so on. That is what education looks like. And so it's pushing back on them to ask them, what problem do you want to solve? What spins in your head? What are you interested in? And have them focus on that. I also talked to them about this idea of iteration, which is a big word in the new economy that we have today, right? How many of you used Google last night? How many of you used it today? How many of you realized that you used a different version of Google today than you did last night, right? A couple of you, right? We update Google about 600 times a year. So that means about twice a day you're using a different version of Google. That's the pace of iteration that we have today. If you're using Google Apps for education in your school system, for example, we update that about 250 times a year, right? So the pace of iteration is what's really important. Besides, I think it replaces the word failure. We say we need to teach our kids how to fail. I don't like that word. I think that there's a very negative connotation to that word, and it also has an opposite word, which is success. And I don't think success is the end point, right? So either succeed or you fail, and I don't like those words. Instead, I like the word iterate, because iteration means that you're always doing something to it. You're always moving, you're always improving, you're always trying different things. And part of that iteration comes with this word that we often use called collaboration. And we say that word a lot, but I don't think that we really know what it means, or we don't use it in the right tense, because collaboration is more than two people working together, or more than a group of people working together. What we really need to teach our kids is true collaboration. That when you are creating something, that it's only going to get better when you put it in front of someone else. And we don't do that in our current system of education. Instead, imagine if you were a teacher and you handed your kids a test, and at the end of the test, two kids came up holding the test together, saying, "We did this together." What do you think a teacher's reaction would be, right? When did collaboration become cheating, right? This whole idea of working together and not only working together, but teaching kids that their stuff is only good enough, is only as good as another person can contribute to it, is what real collaboration is. Or the idea that we need to teach our kids how to ask good, meaningful questions and be able to listen. Listening is part of collaboration. Or the idea of teaching kids that they can change their mind based on learning from someone else. These are things that we need to teach in education around collaboration, and that's absolutely critical. And then finally, I talked to them about becoming digital leaders. I'm afraid that for this generation of kids, because we're not teaching these skills in schools, that they're becoming consumers of technology and not creators of technology and not developers of their digital portfolio. And so for me, it's absolutely critical that we create digital leaders, because digital citizenship is the minimum requirement, right? They're born citizens, they're living in this environment. What they need to do is become leaders so that what they're posting online, what they're sharing online, what they're doing online is reflective of the digital portfolio that they want to be able to have other people see. And not only that, that they're creating videos and watching videos, and that they're creating blogs and that they're reading blogs, and that they're taking the whole thing in so that they become real digital citizens. And obviously, for me, I think that starts in the classroom. And if you're a teacher, and I say this to teachers all the time, I free teachers from having to be the Google in a room. You no longer have to be the Google in the room. And it made sense at one point that teachers were that Google in the room, because when I was in school and you asked me a question, and I didn't know the answer, I'd say, I'll be back in 2 days, I'm gonna go find out, and then I would have to go find out what that answer is. Well, today, because the world's information is at your fingertips, it's no longer about just finding the answer. It's about what you do with that answer. And that's absolutely critical. Even as a parent, I thought that one of the benefits of being a parent was that I could just make things up whenever I wanted to. And that's no longer true, right? Your kids are vetting everything that you say all the time, right? They're checking you. They have you on check all the time because they can just reach into their pockets and see if you're right or wrong. So my revenge is that when my kid asks me a question that I know they can look up, I always say, and William loves this answer, is, I think you're mistaken. I work for the search engine. I'm not actually the search engine. Go look it up yourself, right? And then it's my responsibility to follow up. What did you learn? What did you find? Where did you find it? Did you vet it? Does it make sense? Is it credible? What does it mean? How do you apply it? So it's my job, it's our job as educators to embed in our kids the desire to understand something deeply, right? I was talking earlier about an example just that happened recently with President's Day. I saw survey results that said that 7% of Americans couldn't name the first 4 presidents of the United States. I'm sorry, could name. Just 7% could name the first 4 presidents of the United States. And if I ask all of you to name me the first 4 presidents of the United States, and I gave you 10 seconds, you can all tell me who the first 4 presidents of the United States were, right? So that information is meaningless because all of you can tell me. Just because you haven't memorized it doesn't mean you can't tell me who the first 4 presidents are. So what I did with my 12-year-old, when I asked him if he could name the first 4 presidents and he couldn't, my assignment to him was, you have to name me the first 4 presidents, and then you have to tell me what their relationship was to each other, what their relationship was to each other. Like, how did they know each other? Like, what did they think about each other? And that changes things from knowing something to understanding something. And that's what we need to do, is help students take information and convert it into intelligence. And that's the role in education. And by the way, when we say the word education, education is not just what happens in school or what happens between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Right? So for those of you who don't recognize the skater, this is Paulina Edmonds, from the 15-year-old skater that just skated in Sochi. And how many of you guys were watching this? Everybody watches the figure skating parts, right? And so she's out skating, and the announcer, and maybe you remember this, but it really hit me. The announcer said to the American audience, don't worry, Paulina's still doing her homework, she's still doing her schoolwork. And I'm sitting there going, what? She's skating in the Olympics. Like, if you have your own wiki page, you should be exempt from having to do worksheets that week, right? Like, that's education, right? Skating in the Olympics, being in Russia, that's what education is. We tend to define education as something that happens between a certain time and a certain date, and education happens all the time. In fact, I don't even like the word student, because I admit, and I have my master's in public policy from Arizona State University, I still remember that last day, that last final, or that last paper that I wrote. And I remember thinking, I am done learning. And I never have to learn anything again, right? And nothing could be further from the truth. There is no difference between my 12-year-old and me. We're both learners. We're just learning different things. And so that idea that education only happens in school is something that we need to fight. Now, it's also important to point out that there are no magic bullets in education. And this is why I call this particular talk Iteration in Education, because that's what we need to get to. I think some of us are waiting for some magical thing to happen, that's some magical solution that's going to happen in education and it's going to solve all our problems. And reality is that we just need to start, and we need to continuously iterate and continuously find ways to innovate in learning so that we can do different things. And we're starting to see some of that, right? And how we do that is some of the things that are happening now with new learning models. When I talk to, how many teachers do I have in the room? Yeah, awesome. So when I talk to teachers, I often say that you guys, the teachers in the room, are the generation, you're the generation that's going to create what the new learning models in this world are going to look like for generations to come. Because you're going through this process right now. You're seeing some of, this generation of teachers are creating the new learning models like flipped classrooms, blended learning, hybrid models, all these different things that I see in this space around the world. This generation of teachers are helping create what those new learning models are going to look like. So we need these new learning models. It's the old saying, you can't expect something different if you keep doing something the same way all the time. And so these new learning models are absolutely critical that we need to focus on around blended, whether it's inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, blended learning. These are some of the things that we're starting to see in this space. So it's really exciting to see. And when I talk to administrators, I talk about this idea that we need to help them, we need to help create great teachers, what I call great educators, because it's not just about the students and new learning models, it's about providing the resources that teachers need in the classroom. Because at the end of the day, all the technology in the world, there's nothing more important to a kid than a great teacher in a classroom. And that's never going to change. And for some of us, like me, that teacher in the classroom might be the most important person in that kid's life, right? And I played ping pong with Vint Cerf last weekend. Vint Cerf was the founder of the World Wide Web. I had dinner with him in Palm Springs last week, and then we played ping pong. We're both terrible, but I've met some very influential people in my life. I've met some incredible people, but I still, after 46 years being here, still remember the impact that my 4th grade teacher taught me on being able to be creative, or my 6th grade teacher taught me with writing, or my 9th grade teacher showed me math in a completely different way. These are very important people in our kids' lives, and so being able to have great educators in the classroom is absolutely critical. And so from an administrator's perspective, what we need to do is make sure that we are giving them the space to iterate, to experiment, to try different things, that we're giving them the professional development that they need so that they can have the skills around communication and collaboration and problem solving and critical thinking so that they can pass those skills on to students in the classroom. Those things are absolutely critical. And of course, I wouldn't be a technologist if I didn't believe that we need to invest in infrastructure. And by investing, I mean access and having broadband. There's way too much, and this is around the world, but in the US, there's way too much conversation about technology being a nice to have and not a necessity. And for me, I think about building a new school building and having a group of people sit around a table and having a conversation about, well, we don't really need electricity on the 3rd floor and the 4th floor, so we'll build a school without electricity, right? We would never do that. Why would we build a school without broadband, right? Actually, if you ask a kid and I know this is not a right analogy, but if you ask a kid what would they rather have, broadband or lights, I bet you they pick broadband, right? Or we would never have a classroom and say, hey, you know, we're only going to have 20 desks in the classroom, so 10 kids are going to have to stand, right? We would never do those things. We see desks and electricity as part of the infrastructure. We need to start looking at broadband and technology as part of the infrastructure. As you know, was one of my favorite teachers likes to say, you can't opt out of the 21st century, right? There's no choice. This is the world that we live in, so we need to invest in this future, not just in our schools, but also in our communities. And I know a couple of people already mentioned, you know, Google Fiber, but that's part of Google Fiber's mission, is to be able to bring access to residential areas so we can do that, so that we can bring access to these communities. Now, when we talk about innovation, innovation is absolutely can be transformational. And if you don't recognize this, this is, if anyone know what this is? This is the original Google.com, right? This is what Google looked like when it started, right? And that's it, that's what it looked like, and now it looks like this. Now, what's important between these two slides is that this wasn't what Google looked like on Monday, and then this is what it looked like on Friday, right? It took 15 years to get here, through continuous iteration, through a desire and a passion to continuously improve. And that's what I'm trying to get to when I talk about iteration, is to get us to move from here to here in education over time, because obviously it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And in education, we can do the same thing. And we're starting to see some of those things again in education, whether you're using, for example, you know, taking a whole bunch of textbooks and digitalizing them is great, but being able to create good digital content is better. You know, being able to create tests online is okay, but being able to create project-based learning is better, right? Being able to use technology to innovate is really what we need to focus on, because that's the critical component. Because one of the things I want to make sure that we don't do is that we don't use technology to make bad education faster and more efficient. Right? That's what that's what we need to avoid. And the only way we avoid that is by making sure that we're continuously iterating, continuously innovating, and that we're using technology to do that. Because as the technologist in the room, I'll also say that technology is not the silver bullet. It's not the answer, right? Technology is an enabling and supporting capability. And that's all it is. It is actually no different than the electricity or the desk. It's just a tool that we can use in education. It's a very powerful tool, but it's a tool that we can use in education to really iterate and transform what learning looks like. So that's absolutely important to keep in mind. I often hear all the time, you know, show me evidence that technology improves education, and my response is, it doesn't. Great education improves education. Or my snarky response is, okay, I'll show you that when you show me how textbooks improve education, right? Or desks improve education, or any other tool in learning improves education. These are all tools, and what we need to do is be able to equip teachers with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to take advantage of these tools in the best way possible in this iteration of what learning looks like. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that we're just getting started. Like we just talked about earlier, it was 5-6 years that we've been using technology in education, so it hasn't been that long. 5 or 6 years that we've been using mobile devices in our own lives, so it hasn't been that long. The web is only 25 years old. We are literally just getting started in this space. And I don't mean just Google, I mean all of us, right? In this journey that we're on to really revamp what learning looks like, so that it looks more like what we need for the future in the 21st century. And I like to leave you with this thought. I want you to think about a 5-year-old. 5-year-old that is, granddaughter, grandson, kid, nephew, whatever you have, and think about a 5-year-old. And then I want you to look at whatever technology you have, whether it's your smartphone, your tablet, your computer, whatever. Think about whatever technology you have, your latest technology, and how cool it is and how hip it is. And then I want you to realize that that device is the worst technology that 5-year-old will ever see in their life. It's their Commodore 64, right? They're gonna find your device in the thrift store in the 50-cent box in 20 years, and they're going to reminisce about how funny it was that this was the technology that his or her parents used 20 years ago. They're gonna find it in the box. They're gonna pull it out of the box, and they're like, "Oh, look how thick it is," and they're gonna say, "It doesn't even bend," right? Or they're gonna say, "Oh," they're gonna laugh at the fact that they're gonna tell stories about how, "Oh, I remember how my dad used to have to plug this in every day and charge it," right? This is the worst technology that they'll ever see. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we ready for that kid that's coming into our school system this fall? Right? These are the kids who are coming into our school system, and it's only going to get worse, right? So that's what we need to think about. So when I started this conversation, I started with this idea that we have to disregard the impossible. And that's what we need to do in education. We need to disregard the impossible, think about what learning should look like, and then we should all be working towards creating what those learning models look like through iteration and through innovation. Thank you very much for your time.
Right. Thank you. All right, we've got time for some questions. If you will raise your hands, Josh, right over here, and we'll get the microphone to you.
Hi, my name's Josh. Sorry, back away a little bit. My name's Josh. I'm a second-year student here. You talk about different innovative models and freeing up space for educators to explore those models. I'm curious your thoughts on the national education models. The last two administrations have been predominantly weighted on standardized tests. How do you get around that to encourage such innovation to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am not a fan of assessments, to be honest with you. Let me restate that. I'm a fan of figuring out how things are going, not a fan of the current model that we have, right? And I totally get what it is. We need to know how people are doing, right? Like, I send my kid to college, and I want to know how my kid is doing, besides the credit card bills that I get. And I want to make sure that they're doing well. And right now, the only model that we've had is this, like, let's test them and see how they're doing model. But then I think about baseball. And I think about, and we were talking about the Yankees, and I'm a big Yankee fan. And I think about Derek Jeter, and I try not to cry as I think about how this is his last season. And I think about Derek Jeter coming up to bat, and the announcer will say on television, here's Derek Jeter, he's up to bat. Derek Jeter bats, 268 on Tuesdays when it's 30 degrees or warmer and the moon is half full, right? That's the level of performance data that we have for baseball. Imagine instead Derek Jeter had to take a test at the end of the season to determine how good he was, right? We need to get to that model, which is performance-based, right? Which is, how do we know, and I don't think that we need to know that specific level of detail, but my point is that we have to get to a performance-based level of modeling. And we're starting to see some of that now, right? So whether you're using Khan Academy or ST Math or Newton or some of the other programs, the assessment's already built in, right? A kid going through a thing like ST Math, for example, goes from one level to the next level and can't progress unless they're showing progress. So a lot of these tools and technology, a lot of these tools that are web-based have the assessment built in. So if we're collecting this information, if we're seeing the kid progress, if we're doing all this, then taking a test at the end of the year doesn't make any sense. So I'm hoping that there's a natural progression to get us to that point. So I'm kind of, again, this idea that maybe it's possible that we can get us to a performance-based system at some point.
Yes, sir, Professor Ernst.
I'm so excited you came here today. Thank you. And part of it is because I'm reminded, after I listened to you carefully, of my Buddhist friends who remind us of the importance of balance. So let me just riff on a couple of things and ask you to respond, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One is,
he's a crazy professor, right?
but mainly social studies teacher. I actually spent time with two different governors and a big city mayor, and I plead part of the responsibility for what we've created. It seems to me one of the challenges, there are a couple of silences. One of the challenges is matching the level of excitement about things like Common Core and these fixed standards notions, this fixed epistemology of knowing that somebody has concluded, largely politicians, that it's also truth. So that's sort of the context. Josh got to the testing part of that. There's another piece, however, that I worry a little bit about when I think about the balance, and that is the silences around some things, some way of knowing and doing. And let me just give you a quick example of what occurred today where I work. We split 2 beehives at our place, and it's really quite interesting. But what we also did, with the help of some really smart kids, we're going to 3D print some probes and some cameras to watch as the new hive develops. So what's my point? What I worry about, and so there's a wonderful volunteer lady named Miss Lula who comes into our greenhouse every day, and she says to me, I first met her and she said, "It is your job to get these kids off the computers and out here in this garden digging in the dirt." So the question I have is, as we think about people like David Orr, who reminds us that the world is in really deep trouble environmentally, and that all education ought to be generated toward saving this earth because there's evidence that we're in trouble. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do we balance the things that are inherently hands-on, gardening, growing bees, understanding the relationship between growing up and earth, and also incorporating, if you will, this magic, this technology, this important tool that kids aren't going to leave in the library, they're going to take out to the greenhouse and out to the bees. So just riff on that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a couple, it's interesting that you brought up bees, and I think there's a balance there already that we just have. Moderation is the key to life, right? And making sure that there's that balance, and that's our responsibility. And listen, as a parent, when my 12-year-old is in his room and I walk in and he's building something, in Minecraft, and he's working with 4 kids that he's never met before, and one of them lives in Australia, and another one, he's yelling at him because he can't understand his English accent, right? And he's globally problem solving and collaborating, and he's telling them what to do, and they're telling him what to do, and they're doing all this stuff, and I walk in going, go outside and play with a stick. Like there is something there, like, they're doing a lot of that already, those types of skills that they want. But I do want him, especially if we move to an inquiry-based, project-based learning model, where it requires hands-on experience, that requires making things, right? The cool thing about what you mentioned with 3D printing is that if you have kids that are interested and they're doing something, and they don't have that tool or that piece or that thing in front of them, they can just print it, right? And speaking about bees, we're having bees in our house come in through the fireplace, and what do I do? I go online and say bees in fireplaces, and what do you do, right? So there's a balance. You can use both at the same time. But as much as I was going to be on my computer was not going to get rid of those bees, right? I was going to have to find a way to get my hands dirty and get rid of those bees, right? That story ends badly. But that's the balance, right? The balance is being able to use it as a tool, right? We've been using tools forever, and there hasn't been, just because you give a man, a saw doesn't mean that he just goes and saws everything, right? It's this idea that there's a balance already that we just have to keep our eye on.
Senator? What?
Uh-oh, she wrote her question down. This one's going to be hard.
No, so I taught school for 30 years, and since the time I've been out, I've seen so many things that have happened that have just drained the joy from teaching. And primary among that is our obsession with testing as well. I want to just reiterate that. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of what we're doing we could cure if we would do a lot of the things you talked about. And I was just noticing, I was just using my phone here and reminding myself that, just today we got the report from the OECD on creative problem solving, students' skills in tackling real life problems. And contrary to the paper pencil test I took before, our students scored above average, not better than everybody in the world, but our students scored above average on problem solving, not test taken necessarily, or there was some kind of test to do this. And my question, though, has to do with getting really good educators in the classroom and not ones like me who would have probably created an insurrection by now. Do you know of any models where teachers who are there are actually getting the time to learn to be great teachers, to actually learn, as opposed to everybody expects them at the end of the day to go home, not have a family, and not be ready to be great teachers when they come back the next day.
The simple answer is yes. And I think first I think of my friend Chris Lehman, who runs the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. They're doing inquiry-based learning, and the teachers there it's a family, and they're doing amazing things. And they're not teaching to the test. They're doing project-based learning. They're doing inquiry-based learning. Or my friend Larry Rosenstock at High Tech High in San Diego, who's doing that same thing. They do project-based learning, and they take the standards in California that they need to learn, they incorporate it into the project-based learning that they're doing, and then when it's time to take a test, they turn around, take the test, pass it with 98%, and then go back to doing project-based learning. So those are just two examples of different models. There's other models like that in New Orleans and Philadelphia, sorry, I already said Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York. There's all these, there are models, and so the key is how do we connect those models, how do we scale those models, and how do we get in front of superintendents and administrators and say, look, these are really good models that you can use. And I think you're starting to see some of that. It's going to take time, and we're going to have some patience, but absolutely there are some of those models currently in the K-12 space that are showing that you don't have to teach the test, that you can do project-based learning, you can do inquiry-based learning. And there's some great curriculums out there, and sorry, I'm smiling because I'm pitching my wife runs a nonprofit called New Global Citizens, and it's a project-based curriculum in K-12 where kids are learning the top 10 problems facing the world, and then they connect with a local organization in the country that's solving that problem. So they learn global sustainability, and then they also learn how that organization or that group in that country is solving that problem. And then they communicate, and they might go on a virtual field trip with them because they can't all go to Kenya to see a project. And what kids do at the end of this curriculum is that they go and form their own club, their own New Global Citizens Club, in school. So that's just, obviously I'm going to use my wife's example or she'll kill me, but that's one example of really great programs that are doing some of the things that you're looking for. So I'm excited about the future of what teaching and learning looks like.
Yes, sir.
I'm a big Googler, and I've used it in writing projects. I'm about finished writing a book that I've been blessed to have Google help. And I've got two quick questions. One, how is the Google auto function affecting education? Because I've ran across terms when I would type in a name that kind of led me off on a different direction, and I wondered how that would impact education. And second, living north of here in the rural area, I see the impact of libraries on education because some families either can't afford a computer at home, or the connections and the Wi-Fi connections, the technology, it's not advanced enough that people have to come to libraries. Sure. And I'm wondering, what do you see the library's impact for Google?
Yeah. So one, I hope I wasn't anti-library. I'm a big fan of libraries. I'm just saying that we have, the information at our fingertips. And most of the world, if you think about most of the world, there's still 5 billion people that don't have access to the internet. And what happens? What's the consequence of going from having no access to having all the world's information? So there's that whole thing. So I think libraries have a huge role in this learning space, especially, and we were talking earlier about MOOCs and this idea that if you're doing online learning, that can only get you so far in the learning process, right? You need that social element to it. You need to gather and work and discuss and yell at each other, right? That's part of learning. And I think that libraries can play a role, like a community role, where people can gather and learn in these spaces. So besides the books and besides the resources, besides that I use my library where I live, there are lots of functions for libraries to be part of the community. Now on the auto function piece, I think what you're referring to is being able to get personalized results when you search.
Or it's automatically included in there.
Right.
I was doing research about the 2013 Calgary flood.
Right.
For a presentation I'm doing in a couple months in Seattle. I type in 2013 Calgary flood, and all of a sudden I see something about vitamins. And it goes back to a study that some people did in Calgary after the flood, dealing with giving vitamins to people who had mental health issues from the flood. And it was based on something they had researched about Same thing that happened in an earthquake in New Zealand a few years ago.
Right. So I would say this, I'm not worried about that yet because I'm more worried about the fact that most kids, and most of us in this room, by the way, aren't very good searchers, right? We think that we can search because we can type something into a search box, but we're not very, like, so if you're typing a question mark into the search box, you're not a good searcher. So, and like 90% of people don't know what function F is on, you know, on a web page. They scroll through names and they don't know that they can just find a name. 90%, right? So I'm more worried about basic search capabilities and being able to teach kids how to search and how to research and how to find things. Most people don't know how to click on the more button on the Google page to actually like customize their search experience. So there's enough basic search knowledge that we need to build that I want to focus on that first. And I think that we can create really good searchers or good researchers, if you will, no matter what site you're using to search, to be able to find what you're looking for. Because I'm worried, again, that we're creating consumers. And, you know, I've seen teachers complain about fifth graders saying, I can't find what you're looking for because it didn't show up as the first search results, right? So yeah, we absolutely need to focus on that. But that's like anything else. It's just like a kid walking into a library and saying, you know, I can't find anything because they can't find the card catalog machine, right? So being able to teach kids how to search and how to vet and how to make sense of information is absolutely critical. I don't know how many of you are Stephen Colbert fans. You know, he had that whole cancel his show thing happen this weekend or this, you know, past 4 days, and it came out of nothing, right? So this idea that information just flows up and that we just take it. I mean, most people that share articles don't even read the articles, right? So we actually need to work on some basic things.
Jamie, I got a question.
Yeah.
When Morrill Harriman and I were in college a few years ago, Arkansas was 50th in the number of bachelor degrees and 50th in the number of master's degrees. Several years later, a few decades later, we're 50th in the number of bachelor's degrees and we're 50th in the number of master's degrees. We've made some pretty good strides in public education. You talk about MOOCs and distance learning and you talk about technology not being a silver bullet, but when you're a state that so desperately needs to educate its citizens, and so many citizens have no access to college campuses or simply don't fit in the traditional college campus mode. What advice could you give us about moving the needle and about saying, you know, you don't have to stay 50th and you don't have to be able to go take Western Civ from 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning to do it? What advice can you give us? Because we got to move the needle. If we're ever going to take the state up, regardless of anything, if we don't get that bachelor and master degree higher, we're not going to take this state up. So
right.
what do you, particularly with just what you laid out of what the younger people are coming, what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the idea that what we need to do is focus on knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? So I think that the idea of a college degree will still be critical. It's still part of the world, but what you're learning is absolutely important in that element. And so making sure that you have a good opportunity to meet your user, you know, at Google, we like to focus on our users, right? And so who are your users? If your users can't come to your campus, then you need to go to them, right? And so making sure that you're providing those types of services and really focusing on your users, because that traditional model might not necessarily work. And we were talking about this earlier, but you know, if you think about Latinos, by the time we get to 2020, 1 in 4 students in K-12 will be Latino. And if you expect all these Latinos who are going to be in our school system that they're going to be able to go to their parents or their fathers and say, hey, I did really good in school, I'm going to go to Arkansas or Stanford or A&M or anywhere, you know, that father's going to be like, yeah, okay, get back in the kitchen, you know, make me my meal and take care of your brother and sister, right? So how do we bring education to them, right? And so we have to think about our users. What problems do they have? What problems are we trying to solve? And what's the best way we can use technology, again, as an infrastructure tool to solve that problem?
Let's give Jamie a round of applause, and we'll have, I know there's more questions, but we'll have the opportunity to visit with him after the program. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for bringing him here.